Alright, g'day everybody. Today we're going to work on this here SEX kit. This is a Dingo kit, and we put it together with a couple extras right off the top. I found some switchback wheels in the bin, and we've moved the speed control back here on the battery tray, and we're using an Nanotech 2200 2-cell for this build, and of course our favorite Bluebird high torque servos with the metal gears. And so today we're going to talk about the options for the front motor mount and transfer case kit from GCM. You can see here that there's a couple options for setups. This would be the stock axial transmission, and we took it right off the middle of the Dingo, and then we just mounted it onto the new motor plate. Now the motor plates all come in black. We're using silver ones just to show for clarity for the build. But we're going to have a look here and see what we can do to get this front motor mount installed in the front of the truck. The stock setup mounts the transmission upside down, as you can see, and it sits in the truck just like this. The kit also comes with a transfer case, which is black in the kit, and we're going to today use the optional AX2 transmission from RC 4-wheel drive. This is, as you can see, a very similar mount to the regular transmission mount, except for now we're going to be able to put a 2-speed up in the front of our Dingo with the GCM transfer case, and you can see how the layout is so similar to the stock one. There's very few differences in the mount, although there are just enough differences to make sure that you have to pick the right one when you're deciding to order your mount or the combo kit. And of course the GCM transfer case is built already and ready to go. So let's have a look over here at the truck and see what we're going to have to do next to get that all fixed up. We're also going to install the front servo mount and bumper mount, which comes with the SEX combo kit, and it's a simple little part that just replaces this front bracket on the front of the SEX frame right here. So with this in place of that, we can reinstall the bumper after we're done our switch over here in the front. So I'm just going to finish taking off the servo here, and we will be able to get going on the front end. The next thing we're going to do is actually remove both of the front shocks, and we're going to take off the stock servo plate, which is mounted to the axle, and we're going to move the shock towers this way. So this shock tower is going to move out here. The one that's on the driver's side is going to switch with the passenger side, and they stay in the same orientation, so I'll show you what that looks like in just a minute. So I've gotten ahead of ourselves a little bit here, and I've taken off this the one shock tower already. And what we're going to do is actually just show you how to switch these around. So this shock tower is going to actually go over here with the body mount toward the outside now. And this shock tower, we'll just take it out, is going to move this way onto this side. And there's no change in direction, so don't turn it around. Leave it from this side to this side. And we've included new hardware to put in here. So at the back, on the back of the plastic, put the new screw through here from the outside, and then align it into the frame hole, and then simply install that screw with your favorite tools, and there we go. We will install the other shock tower in exactly the same way, but don't over tighten them, because we're going to have to adjust them a little bit this direction in order to make sure that the motor mount is lined up. So let's get this side installed as well, and we will put it on with our fancy wrench here, lining up the holes in the right spot. You have options here. If you don't want to reuse the original center plastic mount, then you could very easily remove it and install some lock nuts there as well. If you wanted to install lock nuts instead of the center brace from the factory, and that's just as well an option. For this build, we're going to leave the mount in there, and so as you can see, what we've done is simply switch them around. So instead of having the tower post on the inside, we've now got the tower post on the outside, and we just took the two and switch them around this direction. So let's go ahead and finish installing the hardware down here, and we'll show you how the motor mount actually goes on now. The motor mount is such a simple outfit because it fits right in between the tower now. This is the stock axial mount, and this mount simply drops right in here, just like this, and it installs right onto the towers, right here, and it installs in the bottom, right through the bottom of the bottom tower bolts, just like that. So we're going to go ahead and set that up, and actually in our case we're going to be using the RC four-wheel drive mount, so it's going to sit in exactly the same spot, just like this. And I'm going to go ahead and get the hardware lined up there and get this set up, and we'll be right back. So I like to install the lower screws here just a little bit through, and they thread into the plastic insert already. And my favorite thing to do on this job is to actually install the screws so that they come through the body a little bit. Let me show you what I mean here. We've got the screws just poking through right here. You see, I've got the threads just sticking through, and on this side here we've got the threads just barely poking through. And that's going to be really helpful when you go to line up the gearbox, because the way that you would do this first is to simply drop the motor mount in, and if you spread the frame rails out a little bit, just enough, you can get the threads to lock on to those two bottom bolts, just like that. And once you get them lined up, it's going to be real easy to thread the rest of the screws in. So now the motor mount is actually sitting there by itself, and when I go to thread in the rest of the screw here, it catches in on the motor mount there, and we'll go ahead and torque that in there. And just before it gets tight, we're going to line up the top and put the top screws in, and so I'll show you that too. Alright, so I've got the top screws in the mount. We put the lower screws in the mount earlier on, and as you can see, I've already reinstalled the one shock. We're just putting it in the last hole in there. The front hole is being used for the mount. And so we're going to go ahead and reinstall the shock on this side as well. And the geometry actually doesn't change using this setup. The suspension and the shock alignment and stuff stays right in the same position. So we're just going to drop this right in here in this back hole, and that just fits right in there like that, and we'll crank that in there. So we've got the suspension reinstalled, and we have the motor mount now put in between the two. The shocks are ready to go. We haven't lost anything in our suspension travel. In fact, I want to show you that the suspension is running at full power, and we'll have a look at that now. As you can see, the motor mount is real tidy in there. There's no conflicts of anywhere, and if you can get a glimpse down below here, you can see there's tons and tons of room. There's the factory 3-link mount down in here, and the suspension compression goes all the way to the bottom, and there's still room under there. And we haven't cut the tabs off of the suspension at all, so the original axial servo mounts are still available. And there's full suspension on this truck, just the way it is. There's lots and lots of room. So we're going to move to installing the transfer case next, and then we'll put in the front servo mount and get the steering hooked up again, and get this truck back on the road. So we've built the transfer case ahead of time, and it's a great little unit that runs at 1-to-1 ratio. This transfer case has been for sale at GCM for years, and it's been used in countless TTC competition rigs, and the list of uses for this transfer case has gone on and on, for 6x6 and many others. The nice thing about this case is because the way the gearing layout is, and its incredibly small size, you can see it takes up just a fraction of the space of the original transmission does. You can lay out the shafts on the transfer case to have the shafts output be in the center, or you can split the shafts and have an input here and a reversed output here and an output here. You can, just depending on how you lay out the shafts, you have all kinds of options. There is a full assembly video available for the transfer case at gcmracing.ca. on the in the driveline section. You'll find the transfer case there and a full assembly instruction. But for this kit, we have it set up so that our transmission output, which is on this side of the truck, is going to go into the transfer case on this side, and then our outputs will be centered. And we're going to reuse the two holes from the original mounting position on the skid plate. So these two holes line up with the GCM transfer case, and this is incredibly easy. There's just we give new hardware for this. The hardware fits up on through the transfer case, and there's lock nuts that fit on top. And so installing the transfer case is just as easy as getting this set up. And we're going to install that now, and we'll be ready to put on the front servo mount. Alright, so we've got the transfer case bolted in here, and as you can see, the disc drive shaft to turn the transfer case will be lined up perfectly with the transmission. Even if you're using the stock axial, you'll still have the transmission output on this side. And then the output shafts are right in the center, ready to go to the front and rear axles, and there's still enough room on the side here to easily put a small speed control or a receiver or whatever else you decide on this side, and that keeps lots of room in the middle for your interior pan. And we'll get to that step in a later build. But essentially we've got this bolted in, and as usual with any of the components that we always ask that it makes most sense, I think, to just install all the hardware lightly, not tight, until you get all the components put in and all the screws are assembled, especially when you're working with plastic parts, because in some cases a used shock tower will be deformed a little bit from extra use. And so make sure that you have all the screws lined up in all the positions before you start tightening the bolts for the final round. Now we're going to install the front servo mount as well. We're going to use a black one here because it might be visible under the body. And so this servo mount uses one M3 screw here and a 256 screw here. So there's 4 attaching screws, and it does line up better with the holes one way, and it lines up a little bit less well on the other way. So pick which way to fit the curve of your chassis at the front. And we've determined that this is a good way to go, and so we're going to just drop the hardware right in here. And this is no more complicated than simply adding the screws. And as we just said, it's always a good opportunity to get everything lined up first with the screws a little bit loose. And then when you're confident that you've got all the hardware in the right places and you're happy with the fit, that's always the time to get out the wrench and give the screws a turn to tighten everything down. So first of all, we're going to make sure that we've got the screws in here lined up. Now this aluminum mount gives a lot of strength to the front of the chassis. It takes all the flex out of the rails in the front from having a plastic cross member, and it gives us the opportunity to mount our servo in here. And of course, because the axial servo was originally centered on the truck, we're going to maintain having the servo centered on the truck. So when you drop in your servo, make sure your orientation is such that your horn will line right up with your original steering. And you should have absolutely no problems simply dropping in the servo and reinstalling your servo horn on, and away you go. You may have to reverse the switch on your transmitter to get the steering to go in the right direction, depending on whether you've turned the servo upside down or not. So we'll have a look at that a little bit later on, but for now I want to also show you that the servo mount works as the bumper receptacle. Now because we're using the servo in the same space as the bumper, obviously we're going to have to shorten the bumper posts, and in our case we're going to have to shorten the bumper post by what looks like removing 4 holes off of these long posts here. So we're just going to snip 4 holes off of these, and then we can install the bumper the same way it was originally and put in the original factory hardware to align the bumper, and that gives us a really solid mount in the front. So we're going to go ahead and cut these and get the servo mounted up and see how that looks. So I'm just finishing off with the servo attaching screws here, and we'll get the bumper out of the way so you can see what we're doing. And in our case we decided to mount the servo on top of the mount as opposed to from the bottom of the mount. So that gives us the horn just barely beneath the frame, so that under full compression we should have no problem with the steering binding. Now obviously we're using the original plastic 3-link here in the suspension system on this Dingo kit, and that's not really ideal for frame mount servo, so we intend to replace that with a 3-link panhard kit at some point. But for now, this will definitely get us running. And as you can see here, there's a lot of room. There's a huge gap still here between the spur gear and the servo mount, so there's lots and lots of room for your steering linkages. For servo horns, there's lots of room up front. No problem with space. We're going to take our bumper here. As you can see, managed to snip off 4 of these little mount holes right on the 4th hole, and we just put that in the saw. You can do it by hand with a hand saw, and we'll put that in and line this up. And then, as you can see with the mounting holes right here, all we have to do is drop in the original attachment hardware, and we've got ourselves a complete front end. And that's what you get with the SCX combo kit, whether using the stock axial transmission from the original SCX, or in our case we're upgrading to using the RC 4-wheel drive AX2 2-speed transmission. And we've got our transfer case installed, and we're ready, in our case, to put in the servo linkage for the 2-speed, as well as the center shafts, and reinstall the drive shafts. We'll do a little bit of wiring to bring our servo back to the receiver, and get the rest of the electronics hooked up, and we're back on the road. And that's it from GCM. Alright, so we got a bunch of progress here on the Dingo Stage 1. And I want to show you just how we set up the drive shafts and what we did with the radio box and a couple little things like that. So we're going to come and have a look at that. Basically the radio box, which used to be sitting right here on the original Dingo, it's now been reused right there beside the transfer case. So the way that we bolted this on is you can see that there's 2 holes here used by the transfer case. And then there's 2 holes on the other side of the transfer case that are not being used. And all we did was run 2 screws up through the back of the transfer case into the box. And we put a couple of nuts on the inside of the box. And so we've actually reused the box right there in the center. And although if you had a full interior, you may not want to do this because of the placement. It is a little bit taller than the transfer case. In fact, it's probably twice as tall. But it does give us a really simple way of stashing our speed control. And we decided to use it for our speed control because the motor wires fit right there and they come in. The speed control is nicely covered up from the dirt and the dust and the grime. And then the battery power comes out right here to the tray, so it's a shoo-in. Usually in our cases we love to put our receivers up here on the front, and we stick them right on top of the servo, and they're up really high, and we always know that if we can keep the lights out of the water and keep the winch out of the water, then the receiver's going to stay dry. So we've got the shafts on the truck. And as you can see, this is a bone stock Dingo underneath. We've put the axial drive shafts on it, and we raided the parts can to get another center drive shaft. We used an axial steel universal on each end, and then just trimmed down a shaft and joined that in between the 2-speed and the transfer case. And so now we have all the wheels going, which includes the spur, and we're about ready to hit the trail here. We're going to spend some time on the bodywork and get this truck finished up. And there you go. There's the Stage 1 Dingo build with the GCM front motor mount, the transfer case, and the servo mount combo kit. And we've got that all dropped in and assembled and ready to go. And that's the combo kit from GCM.